sometimes what's most important is the information that's not there. So don't be afraid to go out and do your own research independently. Never sign on the dotted line just because someone's pressuring you to sign, or this will only be good. I mean, nothing's ever only good right now when that person is in front of you, unless they're just a pushy person trying to make a sale. Like you can always say, look, I need to take this home and think about it and do my own research, and I'll get back to you, whatever, tomorrow, next week.
The problem is there's something called survivorship bias. What they're not telling you is they closed down or merged all the ones that were less well performing. And so it's just the survivor, of those great ones. And not that they're so great. They want you to think that their portfolio managers are amazing. And, look at these, how it's relative. That's misinformation, right? I think the regulators need to get on that, frankly. So they should be forced to surface the fact that, they've closed these, been merged with all sorts of things, all sorts of tricks. If you want to know where someone is coming from and the veracity of what they say, and the importance of what they say, look at what their self-interest is. Try and figure out like what's in it for them, in other words, and why might they say something.
Yes. And I think it's, and I like to live kind of rather transparently when it comes to self-interest, and I think the best salespeople will do that. We'll try to say, well, hey, look, of course I'm interested in your business, but honestly, I think this is why I think you would do well, with us versus another competitor. One of the challenges with healthcare is it's sort of, it's almost geared towards fixing things that are wrong as opposed to giving you information about what's right.
Yes.
Yes. And so how do you stay healthy? I mean, there's no magic to it. It's like eat. I think there was some 6-word phrase that was like, don't, eat, not too much, mostly plants, something like that.
Oh, I read that. Yeah. There's a very good journalist who did that.
Yeah.
Name escapes me, but that's a terrific book. It's Pollen. It's something Pollen. That's his last name.
Oh,
and he that's a terrific book. And I think that's it. Eat whole foods, eat healthy foods. It comes back to that. Like I read,
exercise, drink lots of water, and
hang out with your friends, especially your high octane friends like Trevor.
Rather than just being a talking head that says all of these things about how glyphosate is wrong, maybe something that might be a bit more practical would be to maybe support a nonprofit, or a research institute that could do some unbiased studies on these compounds to really understand what's going on, in a way that the research is still done by scientists, but those scientists get source, because unfortunately the practical reality is that science is increasingly costly. There are there's more and more equipment, there's more and more ways of doing these experiments that get more and more expensive every year. And so
there are fewer, we're graduating in this part of the world, maybe, on a percentage basis of our population, fewer and fewer scientists, STEM people, right? Welcome again, friends, high octane friends, I should say. And if you've stuck with us so far, this is episode, is it 5 or 6?
Five.
Oh,
5.
My son's favorite number, and so that on as well.
Yeah, made it past a month, which is great.
Yeah, we're going to talk about something that is increasingly important, is how to identify and avoid misinformation. So we are bombarded by this today in a multitude of ways and areas. So everything from information about health food, like supplementation claims and health, and even sometimes, claims by authorities like doctors, which is scary. And increasingly, physicians and dentists and other healthcare providers, for example, are being bought and paid for to sponsor all sorts of things, right? So certainly supplements. I'm very concerned about this. and also in other realms of life, our financial life, and even well, I don't know what we're going to get into relationships. We talked about that, but anyways, a whole bunch of stuff we're going to get into today, and even we'll touch on it, politics a little bit, right? Because it's so overwhelmingly important. Although we're not going to go into how much we like or dislike certain people or parties or governments, whatever. So we'll talk about that, and I would be remiss to not say, very relevantly, today's episode is brought to you by X23 Gork. X23 Gork, as the label says, this is really high octane stuff. This is our new I can't even say it. Our new pineapple blend. No, our new proprietary. It is actually pineapple flavored. It's pineapple and ham pizza flavored, which is very unique.
Which was invented in Canada.
Very Canadian, just down the street here in Toronto. Yeah. And as the label says, which, therefore it must be true, promotes extreme musculature and attractiveness. And just look at our lumpy faces. We've only been using it a week, and we were way lumpier a week ago, right? Like I had that big boil on my face. You go back and look at it. But of course, so yes, X23 Gork. If it's normally $73.27 a bottle. But if you act by the end of this episode, and I'll send you can go to highoctanefriends.com and you can send us the payment immediately.
Yes. Send us your payment information.
So it's normally that price, but if you act before the end of the day, it's only 3 easy payments of $173.21. So that doesn't make sense, and that's the point. So, X23 Gork, what is it? May contain total BS, not recommended for smart people or goats. And, the health claims have not been tested by even a high school chemistry dropout. So, and directions for use, because, as it says, promotes extreme musculature and attractiveness. Directions for use are this, and they must be followed to a T. Otherwise, it's really not going to work. So upon getting it in the mail, so allow 6 to 12 months for delivery by Canada Post, of course, which may not even be around in another 6 to 12 months. That's why we're saying that. But if you do get it, immediately for optimal results, especially muscle gain, immediately dump it out into the garbage, refill it with cement, and then lift it at least 30 times, 3 times a week. And I guarantee you that will put on muscle. See, so we know it works. Okay, X23 Gork. So yeah, that might be a good lead-in for you, perhaps, Trevor, to talk a little bit, since you have an amazing background in bioengineering from MIT, and for the last 20 years you've been applying AI and machine learning, all that fancy stuff to diagnostic imaging and all. I don't want to say what you do, because I don't really know.
Not diagnostic.
Not diagnostic.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say that the preponderance of misinformation is just going to explode with all of these new tools, and even knowing what is truth, is challenging, particularly if you're using ChatGPT, right? And so this is something to remember, is that all AIs are prone to this thing called hallucination, and that's where if the AI doesn't know something, it will make up something, because it's just a predictive machine that's been trained on a bunch of text, and there is actually even there's a parameter in there that you can modify called the temperature, and if you keep the temperature very low, it's going to not speculate too much, but you can raise the temperature and it will start to speculate wildly. But the challenge is that the outputs from ChatGPT are always confident. Even if they're wrong, they will be confidently wrong. And so, I think that's a big thing to think about, is trust but verify. And that I would say that if there's...
Isn't it Ronald Reagan that popularized that?
I don't know.
Yeah, as
I
far
don't
as
know where it came from actually. Probably did, but
yeah, I think
yeah.
it came out of the Soviet U.S.
Hmm.
Cold War, and they were trying to. I think that was when they were designing or writing the nuclear non-proliferation treaty,
Uh,
and of course, Reagan was going up there as if he was a world savior and saying, "Okay, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down the
the
wall,
wall,
and
yeah, yeah.
East Berlin, and then stop it with the missiles and everything. And what we will trust that you'll do all this, but we'll verify."
Hmm.
Which of
Hmm.
course is kind of oxymoronic because it doesn't mean you're going to trust at all. I don't think you
Well,
should trust. I think you should have a healthy skepticism about anything.
yes, yes, and it goes back to kind of what we talked about before about critical thinking, and the fact that you really should take everything that you read critically. I mean, it's impossible to validate every single claim that you read every day. And I'll admit I sometimes fall prone to this myself. I'll see something
Yeah.
that kind of again validates my assumptions, and I'll repost it on Facebook or something, and then one of my friends will kindly point out to me that actually this is misinformation. And so probably the first thing, and so we all can fall prone to it. It's absolutely something that happens, particularly when it confirms your pre-existing biases. If you see
Yeah.
something and it feels too good to be true and it confirms your pre-existing biases, maybe just do a quick Google search. And there's any number of of great tools out there like Snopes.com and like various trust meters for certainly for anything from news through sort of medical and other types of information that you can go and you can validate what you see to just quickly check if it's something that's true or if it's something that has been made up to suit a particular narrative.
Yeah.
And I was going to say the other thing is also that that we need it's useful to in going back to the case of sort of ChatGPT and it making things up is do a little bit of digging before you just take what it says for grant verbatim and that could be
Check the sources.
check the sources. Always ask. It's particularly when you're using these sorts of tools. Ask for sources, and ask it to give you sources, and then check those sources. I mean, there's a story of some lawyers that have used ChatGPT and just sort of copied and pasted the whole thing over, and it was citing a whole bunch of case law that never existed, and the judge quickly caught that and the lawyer got in a lot of trouble because he was just using just making stuff up willy nilly, and that was just the Chat GPT doing what it does, which is when it doesn't know something, it'll make something up. And like I've had
Why is that? Why doesn't it just say I don't know or I'm not sure or the data on that's incomplete?
That's a good question. I mean, I think
Is it Sam Altman basically saying like give them an answer no matter what?
No. I think it's just in the way that it's trained. Is that it's trained to, again, it's not trained to give you the truth. It's trained to predict the next word in a sentence, and all of these kind of emergent, capabilities of it being able to know, a lot about a particular topic is mostly just because it's ingested a bunch of information off the internet. But
which may or may not be true,
which
right?
yeah, but the information it learned from may or may not be true, and then it's I mean, in my case, I've found that it's so pathologically kind of eager to please that and sycophantic that it really wants to give you an answer. It doesn't want to say, well, I don't know. And so, in the absence of having information, well, I had one example. I was getting it to do some data analysis for me, and I said, "Here's this file. Input it, and then do some calculations." And so it said, "Well, I couldn't quite figure out. I couldn't quite figure out how to import that file, so I made up some data, and I'm going to use that." And so, if I had not been careful and read the code that it was importing, I would have been running a bunch of analysis on random numbers that it generated and then used for its work, because it wanted to solve the ultimate problem, which was the thing that I was trying to solve. And you know, to it, like it doesn't, it's not aligned with the same things that you're aligned to, you know. So and there's a whole field of like AI alignment and how to get it to work properly. But you know, it's reward. It gets rewarded based off of giving you an answer that you're happy with, and that may or may not involve shortcuts. And if it can take a shortcut, it will take a shortcut. You know.
Yeah.
There's another.
I would think that the underlying motivation, if you will, although it's hard to ascribe any kind of emotion to essentially a machine or an algorithm, but you know, the people who program it have real incentives and motivations. I think it comes down to money. You know, if too often, because I've heard something like there's a 30% or so on average error rate for a lot of queries to ChatGPT and their competitors, and so to leave 30% of the queries unanswered with something like, oh, I don't know the answer to that, or the data is not sufficient, blah, 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 that probably means less money either in terms of profit, or, you know, they don't fill the next round at at a high valuation or investment. So I'm skeptical about these jokers, to be very frank with you. It seems like these large language models, which is primarily what AI is today, right? They seem little more than just sentence finishers. You know, it's
that's how they were trained initially, was as sentence finishers, and then you know, they have been found. You know, I mean, they are still very useful. I think I tend to try to use them as sort of like a smart. You know, it's one step smarter than a Google search engine, right? A Google keyword. So you enter a thing into a search engine, it's gonna look that stuff up and give you a bunch of links back. With ChatGPT, you can ask for a bit more. Or now, I mean, Google started to incorporate this into their search function. Is that there's an AI summary thing that will tell you in a bit more detail, kind of some more extended information past just the results to the specific search query that you entered.
Okay,
but it's
you got to read. Still, you got to read the citations, the links. I guess that's the key.
Well, and so I think that's very, very critical. Again, is to go back and ask, where did you come up with this, and is this based off? You know, what is this information based off of? And if it can't give you a reasonable answer to that, or if it gives you an answer and you look that citation up and that citation doesn't exist, well then it's made that stuff up wholesale. So yeah,
it almost makes me think that, you know, the modern equivalent of, or the new equivalent of the fine print, read the fine print in the contract, is read the links, you know, to the sources.
Yes.
And that
material, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. That brings up an example that I wanted to raise, which is, you know, we're talking about misinformation, how that comes across, like misinformation, or there's even, you know, sort of more malevolently disinformation, is purposely trying to put untruths out there, or even just what's the other one I was thinking? Sins of omission. You know, what's not in there. Something could be factually correct, but it could be out of context or missing something, so you don't know.
Yes.
But you know, in the financial world, where I come from, you know, there's so many examples of this. Like, you think, you know, I used to be an investment advisor, and in Canada, we have, if not the highest, among the world's highest mutual fund fees, right? And that's fine. You know, I would pay 50% annual management fees, MERs, on a mutual fund if it returned for me, say 100%. Like, okay, fine. You know, you're worth your 50%. But the reality is that in Canada, for example, there are over 4,000 mutual fund fees, right? And we only have a handful of big banks. And so they tend to, of course, look kindly upon at least their financial advisors that push their own brand of funds. But that's a few out of a pool of over 4,000. Statistically, therefore, it is highly improbable that over time theirs are going to be the best ones. And so what that means is you need to be very, very careful about how you choose things. And so a lot of people, they do take the lazy shortcut. They don't read the fine print. They don't have an advisor to, you know, who's good, who could advise them. I do suggest you get an advisor, by the way. Even even in the day and age of, robo advisors and being able to trade on your own account and do I don't recommend that. But so if you look at that figure, the world's highest mutual, I don't know what it is exactly today, but it's really high. And how do I know what I'm going to get as the best mutual fund if you were going to go that route? I personally typically don't like them, but anyway, there are cases to be made for them. If you could find the best one, absolutely. But how do you do that? And so one of the ways in which the mutual fund companies and the bank-sponsored mutual fund organizations that produce the manufacturers of those mutual funds, as they call it, which sounds like a funny name for something that's not a physical product, is that they will show you, they will say, oh, our fund has been the best performing over 5 years or 3 years or something like that. And the problem is there's something called survivorship bias. What they're not telling you is they closed down or merged all the ones that were less well performing. And so it's just the survivor, of those great ones. And not that they're so great. They want you to think that their portfolio managers are amazing. And, look at these, how it's relative. That's misinformation, right? I think the regulators need to get on that, frankly. So they should be forced to surface the fact that, they've closed these, been merged with all sorts of things, all sorts of tricks.
Right.
And that one in the financial realm of misinformation we can talk about, or misleading information.
Yeah.
It's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
Misleading is if you look at a mortgage world. So I also operate in that realm. I can't talk too much about it because, I can give you my license number and everything like that. I want to promote my services per se, but in the mortgage, we're all interested, for those of us who have a mortgage or want to get a mortgage. There's this idea, usually propagated by the big lenders, that it's all about rates. So in Canada in particular, less so in the United States, where they have more bank competition because they have more banks. We only have a handful, and they dominate, right? It's like, I don't know, over 85% of the market share for mortgages in Canada, as one example of a financial product, a big one. That's where the real money is made, I think. Anyway, so one of the things that they will focus you on more is just a lower rate. So they focus it too much on rates, not enough. They don't want you to read the fine print again. So it's not just about the low rate. You have to look at the terms and conditions. You have to look at, is it flexible? Or if something happens in your life over the term of your mortgage, if you're going to have to get out of your mortgage all of a sudden, but you can't, you have to pay big penalties, or you're not allowed to do certain. Right. Well, that's not good. Right. It's not worth the admission of the low rate. And they'll do things like, banks, particularly, some of them are guilty of this. Like, oh, we'll give you cash back. So don't look over here. It's like the illusionist. Don't look over here. It's what's that word? Misdirection. Mm-hmm. You need to look at it as totality. Talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about. And these people are biased. Always look at their self-interest. I think that's one of the ways in which people can avoid being negatively impacted by misinformation or misleading. What are those? My wife's boss, who's a very, very smart guy, had said that, if you want to know where someone is coming from and the veracity of what they say, and the importance of what they say, look at what their self-interest is. Try and figure out what's in it for them, in other words, and why might they say something.
Yes. And I think it's, and I like to live kind of rather transparently when it comes to self-interest, and I think the best salespeople will do that. We'll try to say, well, hey, look, of course I'm interested in your business, but honestly, I think this is why I think you would do well, with us versus another competitor kind of thing. And I think oftentimes, but then unfortunately the challenge is that not everybody does the same thing, and there is a lot of wiggle room in, as you say, Rob, in sort of the way that you even present your data, and that survivorship, bias and everything else that can distort what you do. And I don't know if you ever saw the survivorship bias, like example from World War II that they took a look at all of the planes that were flying back and looked at where the bullet holes were, and then they were like,
Yeah.
well, we should reinforce where these bullet holes were, and it's like, no, you reinforce where the bullet holes were not, because those were the planes that didn't make it back, and the bullet, there were gaps in the two engines and the cockpit and some other parts of the plane. So it's kind of like, no, that's the traditional kind of thing of the data that you see isn't always telling you the information that you are deducing from it. That it's actually what's important is kind of sometimes what's most important is the information that's not there. So don't be afraid to go out and do your own research independently. Never sign on the dotted line just because someone's pressuring you to sign, or this will only be good. I mean, nothing's ever only good right now when that person is in front of you, unless they're just a pushy person trying to make a sale. Like you can always say, look, I need to take this home and think about it and do my own research, and I'll get back to you tomorrow, next week.
Fast. Again, this episode is brought to you by X23 Borg. And as I said before, I think I said, I may screw it up. You can buy it right now for $73.23.
Yeah.
And that's Canadian dollars, not Hong Kong dollars. We won't mention the other dollar. Or you can buy it in 3 easy payments of $159.63. It's up to you.
Yeah.
So, but do it now.
But do it now. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So sort of pressuring, and then I think the other thing I was going to say is really, coming back to kind of the political sphere, is that that over the Cold War, this sort of this idea of misinformation and kind of played a huge role. So like the KGB was and I think especially nowadays even it's increased, that there's a number of bots or other either just comment farms of people making comments that push a particular worldview, or increasingly bots that are designed to kind of push out one type of view that will try and get people to convince them to adopt one idea, or I mean even whole media ecosystems like Fox News in the States, where it's just all one side of the story over and over and over again, and so like choose your media sources wisely to just as it's good to have a balanced diet in health wise, it's also good to have a balanced media diet.
You know what, that thank you for mentioning that, because my father-in-law, who unfortunately passed away about a year and a half ago, so like last year, was it last year January, or is it, yeah, anyway, a very smart man, he's a former I won't go too much into detail about him because Gina doesn't like me talking about that. But I will say this, that the smartest thing I ever heard about nutrition and eating was from him. And I read a lot about this stuff. I'm not a doctor. I don't work on the science side of it like you do, but I am definitely very interested in that. And I'm pretty well read about it. But I think he hit it on the head with his thing. Is like, basically he was saying the most important thing is that you eat a variety of foods. Right, you can't really go wrong with that. And it goes the same for other things, like it's a kind of mental nutrition. The sources of information you get. Do you read books, or are you just on Facebook, or are you just on Fox News? So Fox News is a very fascinating case to me, because I don't fully understand how such a large group of people could be so duped. But of course, they may disagree with me, and they might think Fox News is terrific, and that's okay. I'm not going to convince you. But what I might convince you of is, like my father-in-law had said, just like with your food, and I think it just seems to make sense. I won't say common sense, because common sense is not always right, but it just seems it's intrinsically sensible to eat a variety of foods, and I think it's intrinsically logically sensible to take in somewhat of a variety of sources. So maybe you don't like reading the Atlantic if you're somebody in North Dakota, and you just watch the Fox and Friends all the time. Okay, well, I'm not going to convince you to stop watching Fox and Friends, but maybe add a few other sources, and you think critically about things. The problem is, I guess, that people are, I don't know, I don't want to say laziness, but I guess we are, but humans, we do tend to
We're
take
creatures of habit. We're creatures of habit.
creatures of habit. Yeah, that's better. But Fox News is such an interesting thing, and if you look at Rupert Murdoch, it comes back to that idea of like, what is somebody trying to say to me? What is their personal interest in this? And Fox News and his whole empire, it's clearly they're the ones, they own sensationalistic tabloid newspapers, and originally in Australia and then the UK and then the US, and they learned. They have behavioral science, and Mark Zuckerberg knows this better than anybody, is that the stuff that really gets your attention and drives engagement is sensationalistic, is negative. Well, I shouldn't even just blame him, because like there's that old adage from journalism: if it bleeds, it leads, which is terrible. Like, because if you think about it, if you've got your hand on the stove, you're going to take the hand off the stove. You're much more incentivized, motivated to take your hand off a hot stove than you are to get a promise of a reward. Like if it says, keep your hand on the hot stove for 30 seconds and I'll give you $100, or your hand's on the hot stove. Screw that. I want to get it off. So the negative impulse is much stronger than the promise of something positive, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So yeah. I don't know what that means for us though. Like say in the context of healthcare information. Like, do you have any comments that might arise about that, Trevor?
It's a good question, because there's so much that goes into healthcare is so complex nowadays that I would say there's not going to be one source of information that's going to give you everything you need. Certainly when it comes to and I think one of the challenges with healthcare is it's sort of it's almost geared towards fixing things that are wrong, as opposed to giving you information about what's right.
Yes.
Yes. And so how do you stay healthy? I mean, there's no magic to it. It's like eat. I think there was some 6-word phrase that was like, don't eat not too much, mostly plants, something like that.
Oh, I read that. Yeah, there's a very good journalist who did that.
Yeah.
Name escapes me, but that's a terrific book. It's Pollen. It's something Pollen. That's his last name. Oh, and he that's a terrific book. And I think that's it. Eat whole foods, eat healthy foods. It comes back to that. Like I read,
exercise, drink lots of water, and
hang out with your friends, especially your high octane friends like Trevor.
And try to avoid stressors or come up with good stress management strategies that aren't maladaptive, like going out and getting super drunk every weekend or something like that. That's probably not.
Which is why I can see from your T-shirt today, representing Ireland. Yeah, another Mick. But instead of it having beer on it, has a harp, which is also very Irish, right?
Yes. Exactly.
So he's a what's the word? Like a master harp player, right? You do the electric harp now, don't you? I don't know. I want you to play the electric harp, but you don't. I don't think you do. What's it say at the bottom of your shirt? Celtic Nation.
Celtic Nation. There you go.
Oh, very sweet. Well, that kind of also includes the Scots in there, doesn't it?
Yes. And McKees are sort of like from
You're more Scottish?
Northern Ireland / Southern Scotland. There was a lot of movement back and forth. So.
Yeah. They were kind of the same originally. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I also want to talk about, like you were talking about health. Let's stay on the health thing for a bit.
Sure.
Because, food marketers are terrible, right? Not just marketers of things like X23 Gork. It's, you'll see stuff like they'll make health claims where I don't even know you want to call it health claims. Like no sugar added.
Gluten-free soda. There is no gluten in soda, or
gluten-free soda. % arsenic free.
Yeah.
What was I eating before? Yeah, or yeah, no sugar added. But what does that mean? Define sugar, right? There's no standardization for this. I guess, does that mean what is it, sucrose?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
No sugar added, but could have other chemicals in it or
Natural
near
sugars, yeah,
sugars.
yeah, yeah,
Could have fructose in it, which
yeah. Mm-hmm.
is or high fructose corn syrup, which they know now is wow, terrible stuff, right? It's implicated in a whole host of
Yeah. Well,
diseases,
and
right?
and I mean this gets into interesting controversial areas like Roundup and glyphosate, right? And this is something that I mean my understanding, and actually I was watching something, a good YouTube video about this, and it included Agent Orange too, that I think is a similar compound to what glyphosate became, and with Agent Orange, the challenge there was that the actual Agent Orange itself was relatively non-toxic. The problem was that the mechanism by which they made it, when it was at high temperatures and was being produced, there was a side effect of dioxin. A side product of dioxin was formed. The dioxin is very, very, very toxic, and so that small contaminant of dioxin was the thing that caused all of the terrible health effects and that kind of stuff. Um,
Okay.
but for glyphosate specifically, I think there's a lot of people that are concerned that this glyphosate is bad for you, and I mean the challenge here is sort of the cost benefit analysis. So glyphosate is a anti herbicide, I think, and anti pest that keeps that keeps these farms continuing to be productive. And then what they've done is that they've actually introduced a gene that is resistant to the effects of this glyphosate or Roundup, and into the genes of certain seeds. But the problem there, I think, is more one of greedy corporations, in terms of that Monsanto, kind of charges farmers for the use of their own seeds and won't let them reuse the seeds, and those sorts of things, because it's got this genetic modification that works with the Roundup that is being used on the plants.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, it's kind of like, well, like we do need more and more food to be produced in order to survive.
Do we? Do we?
Society.
I just want to challenge that, and
Mm,
I'm not saying one way or the other, but because I wonder, particularly in the Western world, right? Like,
mm,
and even more particularly in the United States, um, it's the most obese country in the world. Canada's probably not far behind, and so people are eating too much. They're eating too much junk,
mm.
and I really wonder, and there's a lot of food goes to waste. Do we really need to produce more food? Like if we
Well,
if we just went organic, would
I
we
would
have food but at a lower level?
I would say it's not so much a question of um, food supplies, it's the right sorts of foods. Like the challenge is that there are food deserts. There are places where there are no there's only sort of corner stores, and the corner stores only have chips and soda and a few other things, right? They don't have fresh vegetables that people can go to make sure that they're eating that healthy diet.
Right.
So so I would say, like globally, we do still, there are still a lot of people living in kind of very desperate situations with not enough water, not enough food, those sorts of things. And there are also lots of food products that go to waste or that get used for other things. Like, the U.S. produces an abundance of corn, and they sometimes turn that into all sorts of things, including alcohol and other products that can be used for other things as well. So I think there's definitely something to be said for not only working on making sure that we are producing food, but also making sure that the right foods are getting to the right people in a way that's equitable, and I think that's maybe exposing some of my biases, in terms of where I lean, but I think that's very much the case. And the fact that that we're obese is more a factor of kind of the easy abundance of availability of cheap, unhealthy foods, and the which is a combination of cultural and a combination of reasons, including cultural, and the fact that like small small farm stands are being replaced by large corporate Walmarts that have all of the unhealthy foods that are specifically designed to be attractive
Keep you hungry.
to your palate and keep you hungry, and yeah, all of those things. And I mean, even now with the advent of these GLP-1 medications like Ozempic and Wegovy and these ones, they act on the hunger centers of your brain to make it that you crave these sorts of foods less, and a lot of these big corporations are now worried because they're like they are, and I mean there's even almost a arms race between people that are making things that will still make you crave the foods even if you're taking GLP-1 drugs.
Right.
So,
Have you seen just kind of a semi-adjacent to that? Have you seen pictures of Serena Williams recently, who went on, I guess it was Ozempic or Wegovy, right? One of those things. And she was always a big woman, right?
Yeah.
She wasn't super thin, but obviously, if not the best, certainly one of the best athletes, female athletes, or athletes in general of all time. And she's lost a ton of weight and looks amazing. Like she's got like a 8. And, this is apparently thanks to that. And then she's kind of pushing this now, right? Which may or may not make sense. I know of one guy who was on Ozempic, and then he claims that he suffered a side effect, which I think might be a fairly common side effect for some people, is that it gave him severe depression, became suicidal, and got off it and would never go on it again. So I think it was Ozempic. I'd have to check that, and maybe people in the comments can check that for me, or we can comment later. But it makes me think, getting back to the issue of, do we have a shortage or not? Like, I guess it depends on where you are. For sure, if you're in a suburb, in a rural area, and you don't have a car, your only access to food oftentimes might seem like it's the convenience store, right? A bit of a food desert. Your grocery store where you have the fresh groceries is 5 miles or 10 miles away. Yeah, that's a problem. And it would be glib of me to say just, well, move, which is what some people would say, and you may not be able to, right? You may not be able to afford to move in, which is awful. But I wonder of the idea of shortages, whether, notwithstanding the truth of all these other things, right? I wonder if companies like Monsanto, which have that glyphosate, what is it, the Roundup, pesticide kind of product, I wonder if they benefit from pushing this idea more than it maybe is really true, that the idea of there's a shortage of food and therefore we have to have these things. If everything were organic, I it's just in my mind. I don't think we're going to solve that issue, but
yeah. Well, again, like I think rather than taking, I am of the opinion that individual, that let's say, well, that there's not some big conspiracy, but that's not in general. In general, I'm of the opinion that that there's not some global conspiracy about this or that. Various there's so many things we can talk about there, but the one might be that that glyphosate causes cancer, and Monsanto's hiding it. I would feel that hopefully there are whistleblowers within organizations that if there was something that was truly bad for you,
it would get out.
That it would get out in some form.
That's
not to say that Monsanto doesn't engage in business practices that are a little kind of like strong-armed. Now they're they might justify that by saying, well, this is what everyone else does, and I would hope that there are some people in these large corporations that would see that, okay, maybe the pursuit of the almighty dollar isn't the be all and end all, and maybe there is some way of making some sort of arrangement with the farmers that lets them use the seeds and reuse the seeds without without sicking the lawyers on them on a small family farm, for example.
Yeah.
But then again, I mean, sometimes there are small family farms, and then there are big agribusinesses that have their own incentives. So,
well, and you can't ascribe any kind of malevolence to one individual person, perhaps not even the CEO, right? Like there's everybody in their kind of siloed in these large companies that have their siloed areas, their jobs, and they're just doing optimizing for their job. But overall, it may end up to be something that, there's an incentive.
There's a global incentive towards a particular thing. Yes. Towards maximizing profit that
well, that's the main thing.
Sorry?
Yeah. I mean, that's how businesses are generally organized, is to maximize profit to whoever owns the shares in the company, or, that's the primary bias in terms of stakeholders. We're all stakeholders. If you look at a Monsanto and a pesticide like that, those things have some positives, of course, right? They produce pest crop damage, but at the same time, there's lots of negative externalities. So, even if I don't consume anything from Monsanto, I go all organic, if I could afford to do that, we're still going to be negatively impacted, because maybe my neighbor who I like is, going to suddenly die of cancer. It happened to me in Vancouver. We had a neighbor, sadly, super nice guy, and his father, his brother, and he all ended up dying of this cancer. And they had a nursery, like a tree nursery, and they were always using this kind of stuff, these chemicals. I don't know if it was just glyphosate. It probably was. But they all ended up getting cancer from it. It was all the same kind of cancer. So, that's, to me, more than coincidence. The other thing I was going to say is, you need to look sometimes, maybe not so much conspiratorial, that maybe there's no grand conspiracy, but the underlying incentive in a system where it's capitalism is to make profit. So there's capitalism incentives versus a conspiracy per se. But, I think if you look at research, and you will know, right? If you look at sponsored research in particular, a company may sponsor research, and they may have that research sponsored at a particularly prestigious institution, like MIT or Harvard or whatever. And that company, not to pick on Monsanto, but maybe it's Monsanto, maybe it's Starbucks. Let's pick Starbucks for an example. Let's say Starbucks, because every once in a while you get these studies about coffee, and it's like, it's super good for you. It's super good for you. It's like, I'm a little skeptical of that, right? Because maybe in some ways, but I do think, the fact that if I have too much coffee and I have gastrointestinal distress, tells me maybe there's a chance that, at least at some levels, maybe it's dose dependent, it's not good for you. So I kind of want to get the full story on the research, but you can't, in those cases where it's sponsored research, sometimes get the truth. Because a lot of times, and I think you can confirm or elaborate on this, what some companies will do is they'll sponsor the research, but they'll only release it if the results are favorable to what they want to.
Yeah. I think.
Is that hard to do?
It's somewhat up to the ethics of the person running the study, and I would hope if there was something significantly negative that they would publish it, even if it was, even if it went against the sponsors' kind of feelings. But I think.
Can you do that though if you're legally contracted? Like let's just set a scenario here, hypothetically. Okay, you're a researcher. You're looking at the biochemical and the ultimate health effects over time. It's a longitudinal. It's a serious study of coffee consumption, and at whatever average levels, and over time they find that this has significant deleterious effects to your health, and then you're bound by contract as a researcher. Cannot say anything negative about the company or with badly on it.
The hope is that So generally, these contracts aren't made between the individual researcher and the company. They are made by, let's say, the university or the hospital as well. Are involved with those. And generally, I believe there tends to be language in there that prohibits the company from. I mean, the company can sort of have its say in what's happening in that research, but it's not like they can say you are forbidden from publishing this data if the results don't agree with something that is favorable to us.
How can they suppress
And
it though? Maybe not completely, but how could in that case Starbucks? Of course, we're just talking hypothetically, right? I don't want to get sued by Starbucks. Like, I
well,
have read
uh,
positive.
yeah,
How
there.
can they suppress that if they got a bad result out of it? That was like, honestly, if you had research that came out of a serious institution tomorrow and it said this will reduce your lifespan by 25 years if you drink 2 cups of coffee every day. Well, obviously Starbucks or every other retailer of that
Mhm.
product is not going to like that. That's big
Well,
money.
I'm not sure that I can answer how would they suppress it. Um, I think I'm just trying to say that, in general, there are, in general, paid research. I mean, peer-reviewed research. You're supposed to declare all of your potential conflicts of interest. You know, and so that's a place where even if you have, and this is becoming more and more, kind of almost a requirement when you're submitting a paper or you're submitting a grant, you declare all even if it's a honorarium for coming and speaking at a company once, kind of thing. You will declare all of those things, and that's kind of a way of at least making it clear that the researchers, yes, they have taken money from some organizations in the past, but that's not to say that, like I mean, I would say the degree to which the the results are potentially biased. Yes, the company might be able to say some things about confirming or denying, some elements of what the research or um, you know, determining which direction the research might go. It might not be a question of even asking, is it going to take years off your life or not? They might not ask that question because if they know, they might get something that might be.
Well, again,
incorrect.
though, then that's the
So
sin of omission, which can lead to
yeah,
misleading, incomplete information.
yeah.
As you're talking, I'm thinking of kind of a famous case where it ended up the company, and I think it pierced the corporate veil. And I think the people who were the founders of the company and major shareholders, the Purdue family I'm talking about Purdue Pharmaceutical, who of
Mm.
course developed and marketed OxyContin,
Yes, yes,
and
yes.
were really the catalyzers, if you will, of the big opiate crisis.
Crisis.
And
Yes.
they were going out to doctors and saying, "Yeah, this is
Mm-hmm.
great," and like, there's no serious
Yeah,
addictive
yeah.
use or problems with it. Like, what killed ultimately is probably killed hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people.
Mm-hmm.
So, even they can convince the doctors, and there's some kind of, like, I don't know, they're sending them on junkets. I'm very uncomfortable with, like, doctors being allowed to go out of their cities. Like, say if you're in Toronto, or if you're in New York City or something, and a pharmaceutical company wants to send, yeah, have it, say something about it. We're not going to tell you what to do, but we're going to fucking send you to a conference in Hawaii and put you up at a 5-star hotel. And do we honestly think that en masse that's not going to, bias them in some way? I think that would be naive. Um,
Yes, but I think the hope is that at least nowadays there are rules in place where
it's getting
where
better.
where
Yeah.
it, well where those conflicts are declared up front.
Okay.
So yes, they're at a 5-star hotel, but they have to say that this is where that source of money came from, and you take that, and then just as we were saying about critical thinking, you take that into account that, okay, this person is sponsored by a company to, and so you might want to take that information into account. One thing I actually wanted to talk about, when even going back to kind of stocks. Let's say you were interested in stocks. There is this concept now of ethical, of sort of ethical stock
Ethical funds
trading,
yeah
ethical funds, and so then
yeah ESG.
yeah, and so then that's something where, if you, let's say, if you're opposed to the fossil fuel industry, you will only trade in funds that do not support that market, and then, okay, maybe you don't make as much as you would, in other areas, but you have more. You have more trust behind that, and so,
You feel better about where your money's going, what it's
yes,
supporting.
what it's
Yeah.
supporting, yeah, and I mean, like, and I think nowadays, like that's becoming more and more true, and whether it's fundraising, or certainly if you're concerned about these sort of the misinformation and that sort of stuff, rather than just sort of rather than just being, let's say, being a talking head that says all of these things about how glyphosate is wrong. Maybe something that might be a bit more practical would be to maybe support a nonprofit, or a research institute that could do some unbiased studies on these compounds to really understand what's going on, in a way that the research is still done by scientists, but those scientists get source, because I mean, unfortunately, the practical reality is that science is increasingly costly. Like there are there's more and more equipment, there's more and more ways of doing these experiments that get more and more expensive every year, and so
there are fewer. We're graduating in this part of the world, maybe on a percentage basis of our population, fewer and fewer scientists, STEM people, right?
Yes, we need to. I mean, one of the big crises in the States is this issue with the H-1B visas. Well, like, okay, you can say you want to get more people from within the country, but the practical matter is there are fewer. Like there's not as many people in some of these high demand fields as there are graduates coming out. So
I'm very pro science. I want to get back to the ESG thing and ethical fund and all that just for a bit, like, because we won't unpack all of that because there's so much to it. Like, I do think, I never would have suggested when I was an investment advisor, I sold my practice like back in 2016, but I never would have put my clients or counsel to put them into, say, a cigarette company.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have done that. But, the idea of a fund more generally that is trying to be ethical and steered away from, say, dirty oil from Alberta, for example, or, and more toward things that are more sustainable from a pollution standpoint, I think is definitely positive. It doesn't necessarily mean that, by the way, that you would earn a lower return. Of course, the devil is in the details also of how you construct your overall portfolio. Like, you're not just talking about things in isolation, like, just buy that one fund, that one ESG fund. Mm-hmm. Well, that may very well not be the way to optimize your overall return. But, there's a lot there. I think there has been a pullback from ESG funds because, particularly in the United States, the current administration and, the forces behind that, they're very much this anti-woke kind of thing. And so I always find it a little bit funny and is ironic the word, just hilarious, because they say anti-woke. Well, what is the opposite of the word woke? Asleep? So you're against people being awake, but you're fucking asleep. Anyway, without delving into that too much. But there is definitely a push toward oil. And, I suspect, not just to dump on those people because there's so many nice ones there, but if you look at a place like Texas or Alberta, there's so much oil in those places, right? So that drives the incentives that, the big money will get their person who's going to help them, help to get them elected. And then, they're going to do all sorts of things to kind of, further entrench the thinking of the people that this is okay. And it's like, to hell with it. I'm going to roll coal, as they say. I'm going to have my big F-150 on stilts, and, it's going to be shooting coal at the back, but to hell with it. It's not a big deal. And, they may even buy in increasingly to that not being very harmful, and climate change is just a cyclical thing, and it's got nothing to do with me rolling coal and the millions of others who are doing that. But I do think it unfortunately, there's been a pullback, and there's been kind of like a smear campaign toward anything that is progressive. That becomes a word, not so bad as, say, woke, but to call yourself a progressive seems to have taken on in some geographies a negative connotation, unfortunately. So there's been a pullback from ethical funds, ESG, right? What is it again? Environmental, social responsibility, and good governance, basically, right? Ethical. But you also, at the same time, you have still some companies that are engaging in greenwashing, right? Like they're kind of saying, our product. I can't think of an example off the top of my head. Maybe you can.
Well, Tesla, right, is making tons of money by just selling all of the green credits that it's receiving by making all of these vehicles that are pure electric, and then I think they sell that that carbon credit, for lack of a better phrase, to other companies, and that's how they make a chunk of their money.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And so, they were very privileged for getting in early and getting all those incentives, right? And then being able to have sellable credits. Wow. It does find it highly ironic, though, that like Elon Musk, the head of the company, is, there he went on and he went over to support a regime. And I do think that's the right word, a regime that is, is essentially very anti-climate change. Climate change.
I think that was more about power, access to power than anything else.
So you think if the person in power was we're talking about the U.S., for example, was a Democrat, then he would have just gone that way? That's interesting. Is that what you mean?
Well, yeah. I mean, he was trying to. Well, I think as with many things with him, I think it was very highly personal that he was not invited to some electric vehicle thing under Biden, and then this was the thing that turned him against.
Wow!
But I can't. I'm not interested in psychoanalyzing that guy, because he's just I don't know. He's very, very.
He's mercurial.
Standard deviations away from normal. Let's just put it that way. So, but
at least two of them away from.
Yes, yeah. But I mean, climate change. I mean, to me, the question of whether there is man-made climate change, is like solved. There is the extent to which we can modify it at this stage, is maybe some place that we could debate. But I think we are seeing clear evidence of the hottest 10 years being the last 10 years on record, and several other things, major indication showing that there are clear changes in the environment. And I mean, even to the extent of large corporations that need to plan into the future are starting to incorporate these these changed climate models into their predictions, and that's not to say that maybe it will be, maybe it won't be. Like it is clear that these things are having an effect, that there is a change in the climate.
Let me challenge you on that for a second. Not really challenge you, but to add to what you're saying, because I want to play devil's advocate here.
Sure.
And, knowing me, I do underscore that word, devil's advocate, because I think we're getting close in some people's cases to the true malevolence, like people who know what's wrong and they still push that, us toward that. But like some people believe that climate change they would go so far to say it's a hoax, or just like it's not it's not really there. And they would point to things. I've heard people talk about, oh, it's just natural variation. Of course, 12,000 years ago, we came out of the ice age or something like that. We have natural variations in the ebb and flow of, climate becoming more extreme and less extreme, and temperatures up and down. And just an example of that. So for those folks who say that kind of thing, I would say two things. First of all, I would highlight what you just said, which is, it is indisputable, right? The amount of evidence and peer-reviewed studies and evidence, and just like from your casual observation, if you're old enough, if you're over 40, I'd say, you've seen that weather has changed in this part of the world, right? So that seems indisputable that it's happening. But the question is then, is it man-made? And so what I'm going to say is, it's going to be very hard to convince those people that think climate change is a hoax, right? If you're just going to say, look, this is, keep going on with your Ford F-150 and you've ripped the catalytic converter off it and all that stuff, and go for it, Billy Bob, whatever. But instead of trying to convince those people of that, I would appeal to them and say, you might be right. I don't think so. But you might be wrong. And so the catastrophic effects of not trying to do something to mitigate against these climate effects is so dire that it is therefore much, much better and more sensible to err on the side of caution. Let's just theoretically assume that maybe on the off chance, Billy Bob, you're wrong, and actually it is man-made, and therefore we have to do something about it. Okay? You might be right, though, and I don't want to be disrespectful. I mean, I guess there is that chance at some level. I think it's infinitesimally small, but some people would very much and vehemently disagree with me. I think it's much safer and more sensible to err on the side of caution and do something about it, right? And I think this pie in the sky idea, and back to Musk again, I think it's disgraceful, these people, and Musk is among them, who are promoting this idea that we can just go to another planet. And, there are people that believe this, right? That it's all in God's plan, and we could, at some point, it's just going to go to hell. It's going to be apocalyptic. There's nothing we can do about it. Everything is predestined, and we'll just go to another planet. Well, I think that's ludicrous. But not to get off track, but I think, not to argue too much with them, but I'd say err on the side of caution, and therefore do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
it's pretty obvious to me, and to you. I know you will too in this. That, like, it's pretty obvious climate change is man-made, and therefore there has to be a man-made solution. By the way, to add a positive point to what we were talking about, I was happy to hear a few months ago that Bill Gates apparently is very optimistic ultimately that we will find a technological solution to climate change. I don't know if that'll be the solution in its entirety, because I do think it requires behavioral change on the part of a large number of humans and countries and policies. But I was heartened to hear him. And of course, maybe back in the 90s and 80s, people didn't really like him. He wasn't such a good character, but I think he's a better person than he used to be. He's done a lot for the world, and he's someone whose opinion I would listen to. And he knows a lot about technology. So the fact that
I think, I mean, we'll get there. I think it just needs to. It's unfortunate that it becomes something of a political cudgel that that conservative parties can use to beat up on the liberal parties. To say, oh well, I mean, even here in Canada, like the climate, the carbon tax and this and that, and it's kind of like, well, we can stick our head in the sand and pretend it doesn't exist, but the fact of the matter is it's here. It's like that. We have made a lot of changes, like carbon dioxide in the oxygen in the atmosphere is more than it's been since however many hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago,
and that's a hard fact, right? You can't argue that.
No, like they have ice cores going back, as they drill into like Antarctica, and they've been sampling, and it is just way outside of the norms, and to think it has no effect, well, you can, I think as we slowly, and I think it's going to also potentially be a generational change, that as you know, as younger generations come up that have been concerned about this problem. Even myself, I think, when I was in college, you know, it was a concern that I was concerned about. I think
Yeah.
I didn't pursue that as kind of as a career choice, but I very well could have. And there are more and more people that are, you know, kind of thinking about potential solutions to the climate crisis. I think there was just a Mars Climate Week was just this past week in Toronto, and
Yeah.
there were
I wish I had been
a
able
lot
to.
of events happening there, and some of my friends are participating in that. And I know even, you know, in my startup cohort, there were some people that were thinking about, you know, are there ways that we can build, let's say, solar power? I mean, we're getting to the point now where that, as you say, the technology has evolved. Like solar panels have become cheap enough that you consider, you know, some sort of solar powered thing that takes carbon dioxide from the oxygen from the air and converts it into limestone or something like that, or you know, is one solution that I've heard of. Or another one
Oh,
is
wow.
or alternatively taking using solar power to desalinate water, so that you come to a place that's got sort of arid areas, and you can actually get water that you can use for farming, just from a just from building a plant. Now that's going to be, you know, infrastructure involved, but building a solar powered plant that could potentially use, whether it's reverse osmosis or some other method, to convert that water, to convert the abundant salt water that's in the oceans into something that can be used for agriculture. So
As you're saying this, because you know, I think the underlying theme. There's a couple of themes we've talked about here, but one of them is, you know, optimism. Are you optimistic? Are you
mm,
optimistic about technology? And I'm particularly interested in the question of, and I'll put it to you, the question of, can technology, in particular, I think AI, in the
mm-hmm.
next say, 10 years, be used credibly on balance to, you know, help get us to I'm going to coin a phrase, a truthier society on balance. You know what I mean? Like, in other words, where, you know, right now, I think
Well,
misinformation is what we're talking about. It's so bad. But, you know, and
mm-hmm.
even AI is a spewer of this misinformation, right? Because of the way it's set up. But
Yeah.
ultimately, can AI be used to, you know, validate the veracity of something else generated by AI to the point where society as a whole, we end up as a more truthful society where data
I
is right.
I'd like to think so. You know, I mean, we're not that far off from. Well, I mean, there are already, you know, fact checkers. You know, well, I mean, there were manual fact checkers that would sit there, and of course they'd get a little overloaded when one of the candidates was speaking versus the other in the past election. But you know, there were people that were starting to do that, and I'm sure is something you can easily set up that would, you know, as I said, just as I sometimes use you know, ChatGPT or Gemini or one of these tools to find out more about a particular topic in real time as we're looking you know, as we're researching stuff. I would see that as being something that is certainly technically possible, right? To have a little chatbot that sits next to your news feed and like starts to flash red when you happen upon some, you know, some Fox News site or some site that is promoting misinformation, to
Yeah, but
give you a
you
sense of.
might get an AI verifier that is also, you know, got, you know,
Well,
the murder
it very
behind
well could have its own biases in there. Absolutely, you're not going to get away from that.
it.
But you know, maybe if all of them say the same thing, including DeepSeek, which wasn't made by, you know, which was made in China, then maybe on average you'll get something closer to a more to objective reality.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, this is
um,
why you want a multipolar world.
mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
don't want it to be, you
Yeah,
know,
and I mean, you can absolutely nowadays you can download and run and build your own large language model and train it on your own set of data.
Oh, really?
And no, there's open source tools like the Llama, which is put out by Meta, which is Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
But Llama is something that you can run locally, and you can even train locally, I think. So there certainly are capabilities like that. I was going to say something else relative to that, but I think, well, there are other people working on. So I have a friend of mine that I think maybe we'll try and get on the podcast. He's head of AI at a company called Biostate AI, and they are working on a kind of a set of AI agents that together work as almost a research lab. And so
like a peer review kind of
like its own form of peer review. And so then there's the researcher, and then there's the other scientists, and they all work together, and they've been able to show that these sorts of tools can start to generate new scientific knowledge, and so I think there's certainly a lot of activity in that space. And I have a friend who's an active, who's kind of he and I were in university together in the early 2000s, and he sort of said we missed the internet wave, and he doesn't want to miss the AI wave. So he's actually left his prestigious job, and he is a full-time entrepreneur now, trying to make a difference in the world of AI, and AI applied to biomedical research, and AI applied to kind of other capabilities, because there's so much possible that you can do with AI that's not just, tell me about the latest whatever, but you can actually use it for coming up with new hypotheses and testing new things out, and maybe solving some of these important problems. Can you build this sort? What would it take to build something that could produce enough water to help you farm in the Sahara Desert?
I suspect problems like that we are close to getting there on. And I also think I am optimistic about the promise of AI to ultimately, in some areas at least, bring down prices and things. How we can, for example, how things are made. We can figure out much more efficient ways to make things, and we can. So I don't want to get too much into that, but
I mean that's definitely something for a future episode. Is kind of diving.
Maybe we'll get an engineer on, and we could talk about that, eh?
Mm-hmm.
Like some of the things that are happening in AI today. Okay, so, I think this was a good episode. I hope you enjoyed it, everybody watching, and we hope to see you next time. We do have some guests coming up, as Trevor alluded. That your friend, we would like to get him. Mm-hmm. So please come back and visit us. Please subscribe to us. We're getting hopefully better at this. And again, as we like to say, if you take even just one gem, if there's one gem in anything that we say here today, then I think it will have been worth it for us, and I think for you as well. And a reason, therefore, to come back. And if you yourself feel you have either a very interesting personal story and or expertises, if I can pluralize that, that you want to discuss and debate and delve into with us, then that's what we're all about. And so we're looking at interesting people, high octane friends. So thank you. See you again. And thank you also to Trevor. This was a good one.
Awesome. No, this is great.
Okay. Should I say once more? Brought to you by X23. I've decided at the end.
It's designed in North Korea, but made in Tanzania.
You got it. It's definitely good. Take a snap of this if you want to see more.
Yeah.
And if you want a special discount, because the price during the time of this thing has gone from $73 to $3,000. But if you want to get it for $1,500, just let me know.
Reach out for a special discount code.
Exactly. Special discount. Okay. Bye, folks.